Chapter 63. How the Admiral returned to Spain to give an account to the Catholic sovereigns of the state of the island of Hispaniola. Returning to the main theme of my history, I say that the Admiral, having pacified the island, built the little town of Isabella and 3 forts in that country, decided to return to Spain to report to the Catholic sovereigns about many things relating to their service. He decided on this especially because many spiteful, envious men were giving the sovereigns false accounts of what was happening in the Indies, to the great prejudice of the Admiral and his brothers. Accordingly, on Thursday, March 10th, 1496, he embarked with 225 Christians and 30 Indians. When it had barely dawned, he hoisted sail, and with winds from the east beat up the coast with the Santa Cruz and the Nina, the same 2 caravels with which he had explored the island of Cuba. Tuesday, March 22nd, he lost sight of the eastern end of Hispaniola and sailed directly east as much as the wind permitted. As the winds were easterly, his provisions running low, and his men tired and in bad humor, on April 6th, he bore away south for the Caribbees, which he reached 3 days later, anchoring at Maria Galante on Saturday, April 9th. Next day he set sail again, although it was not his custom to leave port on Sunday, because the men complained that since they were searching for food, they need not observe the holidays so strictly. So he stood over to Guadalupe, where he anchored and sent some armed boats ashore. But before they reached the beach, a multitude of women, armed with bows and arrows, and with plumes on their heads, rushed out of the woods and assumed a menacing attitude. On this account, and also because the sea was rather choppy, the men in the boats had 2 Indians from Hispaniola swim ashore to inform the women about the Christians. When told that the Christians only wanted to barter their truck for provisions, the women replied they should go to the northern shore of the island, where their husbands would furnish them with what they needed. Sailing close under the shore, the Admiral's men saw many Indians with bows and arrows, who shot at them and uttered great cries, but the arrows fell short. Seeing the armed boats coming ashore, the Indians withdrew to form an ambush, and when our men were about to land, they attacked in order to prevent it. Frightened by the Lombard shots fired from the ships, they retreated, leaving their possessions and houses, which the Christians entered, looting and destroying all they found. Being familiar with the Indian method of making bread, they took their cassava dough and made enough bread to satisfy their needs. In the huts, they found large parrots, honey, wax, and iron, which the Indians used to make little hatchets. And there were looms like our tapestry looms, on which they weave cloth. The huts were not round in shape, as is customary on the other islands, but square. In one they found a human arm roasting on a spit. While the bread was being made, the Admiral sent 40 men on a reconnaissance of the island to learn something of its nature and resources. Next day they returned with a haul of 10 women and 3 boys, all the others having fled. Among the prisoners was a cacique's wife, who almost got the better of a very swift-footed and courageous Canary Islander who had come with the Admiral. She would have escaped from him if, seeing that he was alone, she had not tried to make him prisoner. She grappled with him, threw him to the ground, and would have choked him if the other Christians had not come to his aid. The women bandaged their legs from the calf to the knee with woven cotton to make them look thicker. They call this adornment coiro, and think it very elegant. They make the bandage so tight that if it is loosened for any reason, the legs look very thin. The Jamaicans, both men and women, also have this custom and even bandage their arms up to the armpit, so that they look as if they wear armlets, such as were once used among us. Their women are excessively stout, so that some of them are an ell and more round. In other respects, their bodies are well proportioned. As soon as their sons can stand and walk, bows are placed in their hands, so that they may learn to shoot. These Indians wear their hair long, flowing over their shoulders, and go about completely naked. The lady cacique who was made prisoner said the whole island belonged to women, and that the persons who had kept the armed boat from going ashore also were women, with the exception of 4 men who happened to be there because at a certain period of the year they come to lie with them. This same custom prevailed among the women of another island named Matanino, of whom they told what certain books tell of the Amazons. The Admiral believed it on account of what he had seen of those women and because of the energy and strength they displayed. These women also seemed more intelligent than those of other islands, for the others only measured time by the sun by day and by the moon at night, while these women kept count of time by the other stars, saying, when the car rises, or such and such a star descends. Then is the time to do so and so. Chapter 64. How the Admiral sailed from the island of Guadalupe for Castile. After they had made enough bread to last them 20 days, having already an equal amount aboard the ships, the Admiral prepared to continue his voyage to Castile. Observing, however, that island was as it were the stepping stone, an entrance to the others, he decided to gain the friendship of those women by giving them some presents to atone for the injuries that had been done them. He had then sent them all ashore, except the Lady Sasique, who agreed to go to Castile with a daughter of hers in the company of some other Indians who had been brought from Hispaniola. One of them was that King Caonabo mentioned above, the greatest and most famous Indian of that island, and that because he was not a native of it, but of the Caribbees. Wednesday, April 20th. Having taken on water, bread, and wood, the Admiral set sail from the island of Guadalupe. With the wind ahead and much calm, he continued sailing as near the 22nd degree of latitude as the wind permitted. For at that time men had not learned the trick of running far northward to catch the southwest winds. As they made little way and carried so many people, by May 20th they began to feel great want of provisions, all being reduced to a daily ration of 6 ounces of bread and 1.5 pints of water. Although there were 8 or 10 pilots aboard the caravels, none of them knew where they were, but the Admiral was very confident that their position was somewhat to the westward of the Azores, stating his reasons in his journal as follows. This morning the Flemish needles varied a point to the northwest as usual, and the Genoese needles, which generally agree with them, varied slightly to the northwest. Later they oscillated between easterly and western variation, which was a sign that our position was somewhat more than 100 leagues to the west of the Azores. Because when we were just at 100 leagues and there were only a few scattered branches of gulfweed in the sea, the Flemish needles varied to the northwest a point, and the Genoese needles cut the true north-north. And when we shall be farther east-northeast, they will do something else. This was quickly verified the next Sunday, May 22nd, by which indication and the certainty of his dead reckoning he then found that he was 100 leagues from the Azores, at which he marveled, and assigned the cause to the difference of the lodestone with which the needles are magnetized. Because up to the meridian they all varied a point to the northwest, and then some held steady while the others, the Genoese, pointed right to the star. And the same thing happened the next day, May 24th. Holding on their course on Wednesday, June 8th, while all the pilots went about like men who were lost or blind, they came in sight of Odemira, between Lisbon and Cape St. Vincent. The night before, while all the other pilots thought they were several days' sail from land, the Admiral ordered sails taken in, for fear of striking land, saying they were near Cape St. Vincent, at which all the pilots laughed, some declaring they were in the Flemish Channel, and others that they were near England. Those who were least mistaken said they were off Galicia, and therefore should not take in sails, for it was better to die by running on the rocky coast than to perish miserably from hunger at sea. So great was their want of provisions that some, like Caribs, proposed to eat the Indians aboard. Others were of the opinion they should save the little food they had by heaving the Indians overboard, and would have done it too if the Admiral had not forbidden it, saying that as Christians and human beings they should not be treated worse than others, for which humanity God rewarded them the next day with the sight of land, as the Admiral had promised. From that time on, the seamen regarded the Admiral as most expert and admirable in matters of navigation. Chapter 65. How the Admiral came to court, and of the new voyage to the Indies that the Catholic sovereigns entrusted to him. On arrival in Castile, the Admiral prepared to set out for the city of Burgos. The Catholic sovereigns were there to celebrate the marriage of the most serene Prince Don Juan, their son, with the Archduchess Margarita of Austria, the Emperor Maximilian's daughter, who was then brought to the prince and received with solemn pomp by the majority of the Spanish nobility and the most illustrious concourse of people ever assembled in Spain. But of these matters I shall not speak, though I was present as page to the said prince, as they are not relevant to my history, and the chroniclers of their highnesses have doubtless done them justice. I return to the Admiral's affairs. On arrival at Burgos, he was well received by the Catholic sovereigns, to whom he presented a great quantity of things and specimens that he brought them from the Indies, including various birds, animals, trees, and plants, as well as such implements and things as the Indians have for their use and pleasure. Many masks and belts, with plates of gold set in place of eyes and ears, and gold dust in its natural state, fine or large as beans and chickpeas, and some the size of pigeon eggs. Later this was not regarded as remarkable, for they found nuggets weighing more than 30 pounds. But at that time it was held to be a wonderful thing, and to portend what the future might bring, so the Catholic sovereigns accepted it with rejoicing as great service. After he had given the sovereigns a report about everything that related to the welfare and settlement of the Indies, the admiral desired to return immediately, fearing that some disaster or misfortune might befall these settlers, especially since he had left them in great want of provisions and other necessities. But insist as he might, since the affairs of that court are usually attended by delay, 10 or 12 months passed before he obtained the dispatch of 2 relief ships under the command of Captain Pedro Fernandez Coronel. Those ships sailed in February 1497, but the admiral stayed to attend to the outfitting of the rest of the fleet that he required for his return voyage to the Indies. It was more than a year before he could see the end of this business. During that time, he resided at Burgos and Medina del Campo. At Medina del Campo in 1498, the Catholic sovereigns granted him many favors and privileges in what related both to the admiral's affairs and estate, and to the better government and administration of the Indies. I shall give account of these things here, in order to make clear the goodwill of the sovereigns toward him and their desire to reward him for his merits and services. Later, because of the lying reports of spiteful and envious men, they changed their demeanor and permitted injuries and offenses to be done to him, as I shall presently relate. At Seville, whither the admiral departed from the court, the dispatch of the fleet was much delayed through neglect and mismanagement on the part of the royal officials, and especially of Don Juan de Fonseca, Archdean of Seville, and later Bishop of Burgos. This gave rise to the mortal hatred that Don Juan ever after bore for the admiral and his projects, heading the faction that caused him to lose the favor of the Catholic sovereigns. In order that my brother Diego and I, who had been pages to Prince Don Juan, who had recently died, should not, on account of this delay, be too long absent from court, the admiral, on November 2nd, 1497, sent us from Seville to serve as pages to the most serene Queen Isabella of glorious memory. Chapter 66. How the admiral set sail from Castile to discover the mainland of Paria. Having outfitted his fleet by dint of great toil and diligence, the admiral on May 30th, 1498, set sail from the port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda, with 6 vessels loaded with provisions and other things needed to relieve the settlers on Hispaniola. Thursday, June 7th, he arrived at the island of Porto Santo, where he heard Mass and stayed long enough to take on water, wood, and other necessities. At nightfall of that day, he set sail for the island of Madeira, where he arrived on Sunday, June 10th. The captain of the island received him in the town of Funchal with much kindness and courtesy, and he remained there several days to take on provisions, sailing again on Saturday afternoon. Tuesday, June 19th, they reached Gomera, where they found a French warship that had captured 2 Spanish vessels. At the admiral's approach, the Frenchmen slipped cables and made off with their prizes, and the admiral, thinking they were merchantmen who were fleeing perhaps because they thought our ships were French corsairs, made no effort to pursue. But after they were a considerable way off, he learned what had happened and sent 3 ships after them, and the Frenchmen, taking fright, let one of the captured ships go and fled with the other. But in their fright and haste to escape from port, they had not put a sufficient prize crew aboard, so there being only 4 Frenchmen and 6 captive Spaniards aboard that vessel, the latter, seeing that help was on the way, overpowered the French, forced them into the hold, and returned to port under escort of the admiral's ships. The admiral ordered the ship returned to its owner, and would have punished the Frenchmen if the governor, Alvaro de Lugo, had not intervened on behalf of all the inhabitants of that place, who pleaded with the admiral to turn the prisoners over to them, to be exchanged for 6 of their people that the Frenchmen had carried away. The admiral willingly granted their request. Thursday, June 21st, he set his course for the island of Faro, and on arrival there, he decided to send 3 of his ships to Hispaniola, proceeding with the others to the Cape Verdes, whence he meant to sail in search of the mainland. Accordingly, he appointed a captain of each ship in the Hispaniola fleet. They were Pedro de Arna, cousin to that Arna who was killed on Hispaniola, Alonso Sanchez de Carvajal, councilman of Baeza, and Juan Antonio Colombo, a kinsman of the admiral. He gave them detailed instructions as to what they must do, ordering that each successively should be captain general of the fleet for a week at a time. Then he departed for the Cape Verdes, and the captain sailed for Hispaniola. As the climate of the region through which he sailed was most unhealthy at that season, the admiral was suddenly seized by grievous pains of gout in the leg, and 4 days after by a terrible fever, but despite his illness he remained sound of mind and diligently noted the runs made by the ship and the changes in weather, as he had done since the beginning of the third voyage. Holding on his course, on Wednesday, June 27th, he sighted the island of Sal, one of the Cape Verdes, passed it without calling, and proceeded to another called Boa Vista, a name that certainly does not correspond to the truth, for it is a miserable and melancholy place. He anchored in a bay on the western shore, nigh to a tiny island, and fronting 6 or 7 houses belonging to the island's inhabitants and to the lepers who come there to be cured of their disease. These miserable folk rejoice at sight of a ship as much as, and even more than, sailors rejoice at sight of land. They hasten to the beach to speak with the sailors sent ashore by the admiral for water and salt. There was a multitude of goats on this island. Perceiving that the visitors were Castilians, the Portuguese who governed the island for his lord hurried to pay his respects to the admiral and offered to satisfy all his wants. The admiral thanked him and ordered that he be shown much courtesy and given refreshments, for as that island is very barren, its inhabitants live very miserably. Wishing to learn how the lepers cured their disease, the admiral asked the governor about it and was told that the temperate climate of the island was the primary cause of the cure. The second cause was their diet of turtle meat and their smearing of themselves with turtle's blood. By prolonged use of this treatment, they are soon cured, but those born with the sickness require a longer treatment. The reason why there are so many turtles there is that during the months of June, July, and August, large numbers of turtles come to the sandy beaches of this island from the coast of Africa. Most of these turtles are the size of an ordinary buckler. Each afternoon, the turtles come out to sleep and lay their eggs in the sand. At night, the Christians go along the beach with lighted torches or lanterns, looking for turtle tracks in the sand. Having found them, they follow them till they come to the turtle. This animal, tired from its long journey, sleeps so soundly that it does not hear the hunter. Then the hunter turns the turtle over on its back, and without doing it any other injury, goes in search of another. For a turtle cannot, because of its great weight, right itself or move from the place where the hunters left it. Having caught all they want, they return the next morning to choose those they like best, and take them away to eat, letting the smaller ones go. Such is the wretched mode of life of the lepers, who have no other occupation or food, for the island is very dry and barren, without trees or good water. The water they draw from their wells is very oily and salty. Even the men charged with the defense of that island, being the governor and 4 others, have nothing more to do than kill goats and salt them for shipment to Portugal. The captain said the goats are so abundant in the mountains that some years they slaughtered a number valued at 3,000 to 4,000 ducats. These goats are all descended from 8 goats brought hither by the owner of the island, named Rodrigo Alonso, clerk of the treasury of the King of Portugal. The hunters frequently go 4 or 5 months without bread or anything else save goat meat or fish, and that is why they were so grateful for the refreshments that the admiral had furnished them. After they had eaten, the governor and his companions, joined by some of the ship's people, went goat hunting, but to kill as many as were needed for the ship's stores would have taken too long, and the admiral was in great haste to depart. On Saturday afternoon of the last day in June, therefore, he left for the island of Sao Tiago, the principal island in the Cape Verde group, which he reached at nightfall the next day, anchoring nigh to a church. He sent a boat ashore to buy some bulls and cows to carry back to Hispaniola, but since it was a slow business and he was anxious to go on, he decided not to tarry any longer, especially since he feared his men might fall sick in that unhealthy spot. He writes that from the time of his arrival in those islands he never saw the sky or any star, save through a haze so thick and warm that 3/4 of the natives of the country were sick, and the rest had a sickly color. Chapter 67. How the admiral left the Cape Verdes in search of the mainland, and of the great heat from which they suffered, and of the clearness with which he saw the pole star. On Thursday, July 5th, the admiral left the island of Sao Tiago, bound for the southwest, intending to sail until he was below the equator, and then sail due west until he struck land or reached a point from which he could sail over to Hispaniola. But on account of the very strong north and northwest currents between those islands, he could not make much way. He writes on Saturday, July 7th, that he was in sight of the island of Fogo, which was still one of the Cape Verdes. He says of this island that it is very high toward the south, and from afar resembles a great church with a campanile on its east side in the shape of a very high, steep peak, which emits much fire and smoke when the winds blow from the east, as also happens on Tenerife, Mount Vesuvius, and Mount Etna. He held on a southwest course until he found himself 5 degrees from the equator, where, after they had sailed continually in the aforementioned haze, the wind fell. This calm lasted 8 days, with a heat so excessive that it scorched the ships. None could endure staying below deck, and but for an occasional rain that obscured the sun, I believe they would have burned alive together with their ships. The first day of that calm being clear, the heat was so great that they must have perished if God had not miraculously relieved them with the aforesaid rain and mist. So having turned somewhat northward, and gotten 7 degrees above the equator, he decided not to sail any further south, but instead proceed due west, at least until he could see how the weather was shaping up. For on account of the heat he had lost many casks of wine and water, which burst, snapping their hoops, and all their wheat and other provisions were scorched. He writes that about the middle of July he very carefully took the altitude of the North Star, and found a remarkable difference between that parallel and the Azores. In the Azores, when the guards were at the east arm, the North Star was lowest, and gradually rose, so that when the guards were overhead, the North Star was 2.5 degrees higher, and being once past that, it began to descend the same 5 degrees it had ascended. He writes that he had made this observation several times, and with favoring weather conditions, but where he now was, in the torrid zone, it happened quite otherwise. When the guards were at the head position, the altitude of the North Star was 6 degrees. And 6 hours later, when the guards passed west arm, the North Star stood 11 degrees above the horizon. And in the morning, when the guards were below the horizon, the North Star was elevated 16 degrees, so that the difference was 10 degrees. It made a circle whose diameter was 10 degrees, whereas in the other place it made but 5, lowering the position. For there it is lowest at the west arm, and here when it is at the head. He found this very difficult to understand. After much pondering, came to the conclusion that in what relates to the circumference of the star's circle at the equator, it appears as it is in reality, and the nearer one draws to the pole, the less it seems to be, because the heaven is more oblique. As for the northwest variation, I believe the North Star is the same quality of the 4 quarters of the magnetic needle, which if touched on the east will point to the east, and similarly to the west, north, or south. That is why the compass maker covers with a cloth every part of the lodestone, except the north part, that is, the part that has the virtue of making the needle point north. Chapter 68. How the Admiral discovered the island of Trinidad and sighted the mainland. Tuesday, the last day of July, 1498. Having sailed westward so many days, the Admiral concluded the Caribbean Islands must be to the north of him. He therefore decided not to hold on that course any longer, but to make for Hispaniola, not only because he was in great want of water, but also because all his provisions were spoiling. He also feared that in his absence a mutiny or disorder might take place among the people he had left there, as had actually happened. He therefore altered his course from the west and stood north, thinking that on the way he might strike one of the Caribbees, where the sailors could rest and the ships take on wood and water, of which they were very short. One day at noon, a sailor from Huelva by the name of Alonso Perez Nazardo, climbing to the crow's nest, saw land some 15 leagues to the westward. It had the appearance of 3 mountains, joined at the base. A little later they perceived that this land extended northwestward, as far as the eye could reach. So, after all had given many thanks to God, and recited the Hail Mary, and other devout prayers that sailors are accustomed to say in time of rejoicing as in adversity, the Admiral gave that island the name of Trinidad, both because he had intended to give that name to the first land he should find, and because he wished to show his gratitude to God, who had shown him those 3 mountains altogether. He then sailed due west toward a cape which lay to the south and cruised along the southern shore of that island till he came to anchor 5 leagues beyond a point that he called Cabo de la Galera, from a nearby rock that from a distance looked like a galley under sail. As he now had only 1 cask of water for all his ship's crew, and the other ships were in the same plight, and there was no good watering place there, he continued on Wednesday morning on his course west, and anchored at another point that he named Punta de la Playa. The sailors went ashore with much merriment, and took water from a pleasant brook. They encountered no people or village in the vicinity, though all along that coast they had seen many huts and villages. They did find signs of fishermen who had fled, leaving their fishing tackle behind. Also they found many footprints of animals that seemed to be goats, and the skeleton of a hornless animal that they judged to be a macaque or a small monkey. They later knew this opinion to be true from the many animals of that kind they saw in Paria. That same day, August 1st, sailing southward between Cabo de la Galera and Punta de la Playa, they saw the continent on their left, 25 leagues away, but they thought it was another island, and the Admiral named it Isla Santa. The coast of Trinidad extends 30 leagues from one point to the other, unbroken by a single harbor its entire length. The whole country was very lovely, with woods reaching down to the water's edge and many villages and huts. They covered this distance in a very short time, because the sea current set so strongly westward that it looked like an impetuous river, both day and night, and at all hours, although the tide on this shore rises and falls more than 60 feet. This happens at San Lucar de Barrameda, whose waters rise and fall with the tide, yet never cease to flow out to sea. Chapter 69. How the Admiral went to the Punta del Arena, and of a canoe that came to speak to him. As they had no opportunity to speak with the natives of the country at the Punta de la Playa, and there was no good watering place there, or one in which they could repair their ships or obtain provisions, the Admiral proceeded the next day, August 2nd, to another point that seemed to be the western end of that island, and named it Punta del Arenal. There he anchored, thinking it offered better protection from the east wind that blew in that region, and hindered the boats in coming and going ashore. As they sailed toward this point, a canoe with 25 persons began to follow them. A larboard shot away, the Indians stopped paddling, and called out to them. Our people did not understand a word they said, but the Indians were probably asking what sort of men the Spaniards were and whence they came, as the Indians are accustomed to do. Since words could not persuade the Indians to come nearer, our men tried to coax them by showing brass pots, mirrors, and other things of which Indians are usually very fond. This brought them a little closer, but from time to time they stopped, as if in doubt. Then the Admiral tried to lure them by staging a show, with a pipe and tabor player mounting the prow, while another sang and played a kettle drum, and some grummets did a dance. At this, the Indians assumed a warlike posture, taking up their shields and beginning to shoot arrows at the entertainers, who promptly stopped their performance. Unwilling to let this insolence go unpunished, lest they feel contempt for the Christians, the Admiral ordered some crossbowmen to shoot at the Indians, who, finding it difficult to retreat, paddled over to the Viquenia, without sign of fear or hesitation. The Viquenia's pilot entered their canoe and gave them some trifles that pleased them greatly. They said that if the Christians came ashore, they would bring them bread from their houses. Then they left for shore, and the ship's people did not detain any for fear of displeasing the Admiral. They said these Indians were of very handsome appearance, and had lighter skins than those on the other islands, that they wore their hair long, like women, tied in the back with small strings, and that they covered their private parts with breech clouts. Chapter 70. Of the danger the ships were in while passing through the Boca de la Serpe, and how Paria was discovered, being the first discovery of the mainland. As soon as the ships had anchored at Punta del Arenal, the Admiral sent boats ashore for water, and to secure an Indian interpreter, but they could do neither, that land being very low and uninhabited. Next day he ordered some wells dug in the sand, but by good fortune they found some already made that contained excellent water. They decided some fishermen must have made them. Having taken all the water they needed, the Admiral decided to make for another mouth to the northwest that he later named the Boca del Dragon, to distinguish it from the one he was in, which he named the Boca de la Serpe. These mouths are formed by the two western points of Trinidad and 2 points issuing from the mainland, and they lie almost due north and south of each other. In the middle of the Boca de la Serpe, where the Admiral was anchored, was a large rock that he named El Gallo. Through this mouth or channel the water ran northward, as furiously as if it were the mouth of a vast river, and they named it the Boca de la Serpe on account of the fright that it gave them. As they lay securely at anchor, there came a wave much greater than usual, running through the mouth northward and making a very great noise. And from the gulf, they now call of Paria, there issued another wave, racing toward the first, so that they came together like two fighters, with a horrid din, causing the sea to rise up like a mountain or hill the whole length of that channel. This mountainous wave came toward the ships to the great terror of all, who feared to be swamped, but by God's grace it passed below the ships, or rather it raised them up, and dropped them down again without doing any injury, save that it snapped one ship's cable and swept it from its anchorage until it hoisted sails and fled from that place. The fury of the wave having soon passed, and seeing how dangerous was that channel, the Admiral set his course through the Boca del Dragon, which lies between the northwest point of Trinidad and the eastern point of Paria. He then sailed westward, thinking Paria to be an island, and hoping to find an egress northwards toward Hispaniola. Though there were many harbors along the coast of Paria, he did not put in any of them, for the whole sea was a harbor, being enclosed by the mainland on all sides. Chapter 71. How in Paria they found gold and pearls and people of goodly condition. August 5th, as he was at anchor and from motives of piety did not wish to set sail that day, which was Sunday, the Admiral sent some boats ashore to a place where they found much fruit of the kind they had seen on the other islands, many trees and signs of people who had fled for fear of the Christians. Not wishing to tarry there any longer, he proceeded 15 leagues up the coast. A canoe with 3 men drew up to the side of the caravel Corio, and the pilot, knowing how eager the admiral was to have speech with those people, pretended he wanted to speak with them, then jumped into the canoe, overturning it. The ship's people picked up those 3 Indians and their canoe and brought them before the admiral, who treated them kindly and sent them ashore with many presents. On the shore were many Indians who, being told by those 3 how well they had been treated, came in their canoes to engage in barter. They had the same possessions as the other Indians, save that they did not have the wooden shields or bucklers, nor did they use the poisonous herb for their arrows, only the Caribs having that practice. For drinking they had a liquor white as milk, and another that verged on black, and tasted like green wine made of unripe grapes. But our people could not learn from what fruit it was made. They wore well-woven cotton cloths in various colors of the size of handkerchiefs, but some larger than others. Of our things they prized most articles of brass, and especially hawksbells. They seemed to be of better disposition and more intelligent than the Indians of Hispaniola. They cover their private parts with vari-colored cloths of the kind mentioned above, and wear another cloth about the head. The women cover nothing, not even their genitals. This is also true of the women on the island of Trinidad. Our men saw nothing here of any value except some small gold mirrors that the Indians wore about their necks. For this reason, and because the admiral lacked the time to investigate the secrets of that country, he ordered 6 Indians taken aboard and continued westward, never suspecting that that land of Paria, which he named Isla de Gracia, was a continent. Soon afterwards, he sighted an island to the south and another of equal size to the west, very mountainous with sown fields and thickly populated. The Indians here had more gold mirrors about their necks than the others, and many guanines, which is a base gold. They said it came from other islands to the west, inhabited by cannibals. The women had on their arms strings of beads interspersed with large and small pearls, some of which the admiral obtained by barter to send to the Catholic sovereigns. Asked where they found those things, they indicated by signs that they found them in oyster shells that they gathered to the west and north of the land of Gracia. Therefore, the admiral determined to make a stop there in order to obtain more certain news of this fortunate discovery. He sent boats ashore, where all the people of that country had gathered. They appeared peaceful and friendly, and begged the Christians to come with them to a nearby house, where they regaled them with food and much of their wine. From this house, which must have been their king's palace, they escorted them to another, belonging to a son of his, where they were shown the same courtesy. These Indians were all lighter skinned than any others they had seen, and acted and looked better, having their hair cut short above the middle of the ear in Castilian fashion. The Spaniards learned from them that that land was named Paria, and that they were pleased to be friends with the Christians. Thereupon our men took leave of them, and returned to the ships.